Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on World War I and look at the forgotten fronts, the battles and the stories far beyond Europe that honestly don't get talked about nearly enough.
You know, if I ask you to picture World War I, what comes to mind? For pretty much all of us, it's a very specific and very grim image, right? It's been burned into our minds by 100 years of movies and books.
Yeah, we're thinking of the Western Front. We see the endless trenches, the mud, the brutal, grinding stalemate. But here's the thing. That's only one chapter in a much, much bigger story.
I mean, they didn't call it a world war for nothing. This conflict was fought everywhere. In the deserts of Africa, the ports of China, across the tiny islands of the Pacific, it pulled millions of people into its vortex and changed their lives forever.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to look at how this war exploded beyond Europe, check out the brutal fighting in the colonies, talk about the millions who served, and see how a single broken promise ended up fueling a global fight for freedom. So you gotta ask, how did a European war go global so fast? Well, the answer is simple: empires. The great European powers had carved up the globe. And Germany? Germany was a huge player in that game. Germany had valuable territory all across Africa, a really important naval base in China, and a whole chain of islands in the Pacific. Now, these weren't just dots on a map. They were symbols of prestige, sources of resources, and crucial for projecting naval power. So the Second War broke out, they instantly became targets for the Allies.
And the first of these imperial dominoes started to fall in Asia, where another rising power saw a golden opportunity to expand its own influence.
Japan, which had an alliance with Great Britain, moved with incredible speed. In just a couple of months, they attacked and captured Germany's key naval base at Qingdao in China. At the exact same time, their navy was sweeping across the Pacific, snatching up Germany's island colonies. It was fast, it was decisive, and by the end of 1914, Germany's empire in Asia and the Pacific was just gone. But while things wrapped up quickly in the Pacific, the story in Africa was completely different. Over there, the fight for Germany's colonies turned into a long, brutal, and absolutely devastating conflict. Just look at the contrast here. In West Africa, the German colony of Togoland was taken over in a few weeks. But in German East Africa, the fighting dragged on for the entire war and actually continued after the armistice in Europe. And a huge reason for that was this one man, General Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck. He was a brilliant commander who used hit-and-run, guerrilla tactics with his force of African soldiers, known as the Askaris. He knew he couldn't win a straight-up fight, so his goal was strategic: tie down as many Allied troops as possible for as long as possible. And he succeeded beyond anyone's imagination. His small force kept hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers bogged down for 4 years. But the cost was absolutely horrific. On this front, disease and starvation killed far more people than bullets ever did. And for the African civilians caught in the middle, it was a catastrophe of famine and forced labor. Which brings us to a really crucial question. Who were all these soldiers fighting these global battles for European empires? The numbers here are just mind-boggling. Look at this number, 1.3 million. That's how many soldiers and laborers served from India alone. And they weren't just defending India. They were sent to fight for the British Empire everywhere, from the trenches of France to the deserts of Mesopotamia.
And it was the same story for all the colonial powers. Britain and France mobilized millions of men from their colonies in Africa and Asia. Some were frontline combat troops, but millions more served as laborers, digging the trenches and carrying the supplies that literally kept the war machine going. They were the empire's human fuel.
So, the really important question is, why did they do it? Why would millions of men from all over the world sign up to fight in what was really a European family feud? Well, the motivations were complex. For some, sure, it was loyalty or a chance for adventure or just a steady paycheck. But for many, especially the educated folks back home, there was this bigger, more powerful hope, a belief that if they sacrificed for the empire, they would be rewarded with respect, with more rights, and maybe, just maybe, with self-government. This wasn't some fringe idea, it was widespread. Even a figure like Mohandas Gandhi initially urged Indians to support the British war effort. The logic seemed simple. If we prove our loyalty, if we prove our worth on the battlefield, then they'll have to recognize us as equals back home. But that is not what happened.
When the war was over and the soldiers came home, they found that nothing had changed. The promises were empty. They didn't come home to victory parades and new freedoms. They came home to the same old discrimination, the same poverty, and the same colonial rule. And this profound sense of betrayal, this shattering of hope, had a massive, unintended consequence. It lit a fire that would end up reshaping the entire 20th century. I mean, just think about it. These soldiers had traveled the world, they had fought and bled right alongside Europeans. They had seen their colonial masters be vulnerable, scared, and human. Their whole perspective on the world and their place in it was changed forever. And so, a new question began to echo in cafes and villages and cities across the colonized world. A simple, powerful, and totally revolutionary question that the empires had no good answer for. That anger and disappointment from the returning veterans became the rocket fuel for modern independence movements. The very men the empires had trained to fight their wars would now start the fight to end those empires. The war had planted the seeds of freedom in the soil of betrayal. Which leaves us with this one last fascinating thought. A war fought between empires for the sake of empire ultimately became the very thing that triggered their downfall, an ironic and world-changing final chapter to the war you thought you knew.